It's time to talk about some books. Never mind, it's time to talk about some books when I have my phone with me. I don't know where I left it. Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. My name is Mel, and today I bring you guys an April wrap-up. That's right, we haven't done one of these in such a long time, but we're gonna be talking about all the books I read in the month of April, from books I read in vlogs, from books I haven't talked about on my channel yet, but we're gonna cover all of the bases today, and from a variety of different genres too. I've got a bunch of them lined up right here, and we've got historical romance, we've got literary fiction, middle grade, contemporary, high fantasy, graphic novels, gothic literature. We literally have it all. So I'm excited to talk about these, and before we get started, I do want you guys to comment down below, how was your reading in April? I don't know if I was the only one, but for me, April was one of those weird reading months where I was kind of in a reading slump, but not. Like, it was weird. Maybe I was just too focused on other things, but something was happening reading-wise. So I want you guys to comment down below how your reading was in April. Also, if my voice sounds kind of different, I literally sneezed so hard before I started filming that now I feel it. My throat feels kind of raw. And before I jump into all of the books that I read in the month of April, I do want to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's video, which is Inkyard Press, in celebration of one of their newest releases, If You Change Your Mind by Robbie Weber. Now, this is Robbie Weber's debut novel, and we follow our main character, Harry, who would love absolutely nothing more than to write all of the Hollywood screenplays. However, Harry is very realistic, and he knows that the path there is not easy, and one of the few ways he can actually get where he wants, also known as the college of his dreams, is to win a screenwriting competition. He has decided, he is determined that he needs to spend the summer free of all distractions so that he can write a potentially winning screenplay and spend the summer free of distractions in order to do that, also known as boys and dating and just teenage life in general. However, we all know that life is not that simple, and Grant is back. He is the reason of Harry's heartbreak, and he might come back with a secret that might just change everything. And there's also a new boy in town called Logan, who is sweet and charming and who may justify every single thing Harry has known about love. And this all may just teach him as well that life never goes according to plan, and that sometimes there needs to be a change in the script. So if you guys are like me and you love a good coming of age story, you love a good summer romance, and you like those Hollywood screenwriter vibes, those like frustrated artist dreams, then this is definitely something you're going to enjoy. The book is out now, which is really good, so you can get a hold of your own copy now, and I will be leaving a link down below so that you guys can check all of the details out. So thank you so much to Inkyard Press for sponsoring today's video, and without further ado, let's get right into all of the books I read in the month of April. Alright, you guys, so kicking things off for the month of April, I read a book that I had absolutely no intention of reading. I won't say probably ever, but this is a book that wasn't even on my radar up until I saw Samira from Blissful Reveries over on Instagram post about it. The rest is history, and that is Kiss the Sky by Krista and Becca Ritchie. This is a part of the Addicted Calloway Sisters series, and I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. I had absolutely no idea that this series were actually meant to be read in tandem. However, after reading this installment and kind of finding out what the rest of the series and books are about, I have absolutely no interest really in reading about the other characters if it's not Caballoway. It is good to note though that Kiss the Sky can be absolutely read as a standalone. I think it has a great ending, something that you can just make up everything else afterwards, and it's just got a really good, like, happy ending, if I do say so myself. And so in this one, we have Rose Calloway, who is a fashion designer. They do come from a very wealthy family, and as her partner in crime, as just her life partner, if you will, we have Connor Cobalt, who also comes from a very wealthy family. He works for his mom in the hopes of someday taking over the empire. However, because of an accident that happened with Rose's sister, her family has kind of been in shambles for a little while, and her fashion line has really suffered the brunt of it. And now, in the hopes of getting the public back in her family's good graces, and in order to build up that fashion line again to where it was before, with good customers, good earnings, good margins, good everything, she signs a contract for a reality TV show that will feature not only her and Connor, but also her sisters, their partners, and their family members as well. And that is literally all you need to know. You can guess everything that comes from this. There's drama, there's jealousy, there's fights, there are loads of steamy moments. It is just such a great book, and I think really what shines so bright with this one is Rose and Connor's relationship. Talk about no miscommunication, talk about a couple that just understands each other, academic rivals, hate rivals to love. It is just absolutely top tier. Connor Cobalt, I've said this before, is literally everything Christian Grey wishes he could be, but he is not. This is like the perfect dom sub sort of relationship without it being that outside of the private corners, if you will. And I really like that. I think the way that it was written was very tasteful, and I also just really like the dynamics between all of the characters. I love how the book mixes elements of like comedy with like really heartfelt moments and then the romance in the midst of it. And in general, having that reality TV element makes it extra entertaining, if I'm being honest. It's really just a book that you sit down to read and it's addicting. Like, you literally cannot stop reading it. I had a great time. There were things about it though that I just wasn't vibing with. Primarily Rose's sister, the one that's involved in the scandal. She is the main character in the Addicted series. That series is all about her and her boyfriend. And I was not vibing with her attitude. Half the time I was like, this is too much. This feels like caricature. But I think the way that it was played up in the novel was just a lot. And I do think a lot of what happens in the book at times does feel overly dramatic for the purpose of bringing in the drama to the story. And it just felt a tad overwritten at times. But overall, I absolutely enjoyed this. Ended up giving it 4 stars. And I just had a good time. And this is what I needed to kick off the month with. The next book I read in April was The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. And this book is probably one of the hardest books to talk about without spoilers I have ever read. But it's mostly because it was so abstract up until you actually get to the explanation plot twist of it all that I genuinely will try my hardest here to be as abstract but clear at the same time when talking about this book. And so in this, we have a boarded up house on the end of a street, and there are 3 residents to this house. A teenage girl that is not allowed to leave, especially not after what happened last time, a cat who loves to read the Bible, and a man who drinks his problems away trying to figure out the gaps in his memory. I know you're probably gonna hear that and be like, Mel, what's happening? This book is primarily what I will call a stream of consciousness narrative. You follow all of these characters very intimately, and you get to follow them on an everyday basis in a way that you get to understand the way that they think and the way that they act, and ultimately the choices and moments that lead them to behave that way. And I also think it's a book you kind of have to be patient with, because it's not one of those thrillers, mysteries that you're going to read and there's instantly going to be things happening all the time. It's rather a very passive narrative that once you get to the explanation, all of it makes sense, but it's again very passive. It is something that you just have to let the current take you up until you get to where you need to go, essentially. And honestly, Catriona Ward's writing was what surprised me the most. I'd never read anything by the author before, and when I tell you guys, I was reading this and I was just in awe of the amount of emotion that the author was able to convey through very small passages in time. Sometimes also the way that the book is written almost feels like vignettes, where it's very frantic, and so you have one scene, it cuts, you have something else entirely, then it cuts, then you have something else, then you have another scene, and so when you put everything together at the end, it again makes sense. But when you're reading it in the moment, there's almost this franticness, there's almost this strangeness to it, but it honestly incites you as the reader to keep on reading up until you get to the part where everything's gonna be explained to you, because you need to know what happens. I also think the way this book talks and navigates the conversation about mental health is really well done. I think it was done very tastefully, though a lot of the things that the book includes is not something I can personally attest to. However, from the outside looking in, it is something that I have heard of before. This all sounds so abstract and I'm absolutely sorry, but just know I really enjoyed this. I gave this 4 stars, and I definitely think the audiobook is really good. It's a great way to go. Next up, I have a Sanderson book, and that is Elantris. Now, this was my Patreon book club pick for the month of March. I ended up reading it in April, and this one I didn't really love. Now, you guys know my history with Sanderson. Everything has been more than a 4-star, but Elantris just didn't hit for me. This was one of those books that I read the first 100 pages, I absolutely loved them, and then slowly but surely the story went downhill for me. Now, in this, obviously, we've got the grand city of Elantris, where magic used to reign supreme, and a lot of people were turned into magic using almost god figures, like people literally consider them god and deities, by an event called the Shead. However, what was once considered a grand old city is now in shambles, really. The magic failed, and now everybody who resides in Elantris is essentially a rotten corpse almost like a zombie of sorts. And it is all kicked off by a princess named Serene who arrives to the land of Arelon to marry the prince Raoden, except she finds out that Raoden is dead and something very mysterious has happened to him, and everybody is determined to find out exactly what has happened to Elantris. Now again, the first 100 pages went by incredibly well for me. I absolutely loved a lot of the elements that this was introducing. I think Sanderson tends to have a lot of refreshing elements for fantasy. We literally have a princess who is actually looking forward to being in this arranged marriage, somebody who is looking forward to potentially falling in love with her match, even though it is in the most unlikely of circumstances, but also the most normal of circumstances given that she is royalty. Now that to me, right off the bat, was super refreshing. Serene is literally a character who was decided, driven. She just was not sitting down to digest anything anybody was telling her. She was seeking out the answers herself, and she was a goal-getter. I absolutely loved that about her. However, there reaches a point in this book, at least for me it did, where things just were no longer interesting. It felt very repetitive. I didn't really feel like the story was giving me anything exciting really in a way that I feel other Sanderson novels have given me exciting things. And so ultimately for me, what I found most interesting was one of the characters who had an entire POV in this, which was Rathan. Now Rathan just had a lot of interesting elements as a character, a lot of religious commentary. He is kind of, I guess, a priest, you could say, but the way that he addresses the conversation about religion, about faith, about devotion was all very interesting to me. And I think if you've read a Sanderson book before, particularly his epics, religion in his books as a theme would be something you're not a stranger to. Now that to me was one of the most interesting parts of the book. However, this really didn't feel top tier Sanderson, which makes a lot of sense because this was his first novel. So I am kind of on the fence about Elantris. Sadly, I just feel like everything about it was underwhelming, and so I ended up giving it 2 stars. And the only reason why I finished this and why I annotated it also was because it was a book club pick. Otherwise, I really do think I would have DNF'd this book. My first historical romance was also read in the month of April, and that is A Week to Be Wicked by Tessa Dare. Who would have thunk? Who would have thunk that Mel would have read a historical romance? And this also ended up being a 4-star for me. Who would have thunk? But honestly, when I think about historical romances, I feel like it has every element that I would typically love. It's got the angst, it's got that playfulness, flirtiness of the time period. Then it also has the courtship side of it, but then also maybe the forbidden romance, and then maybe the adventure, and just everything mixed into this is exactly what I would love out of a romance. And so I don't know why it took me so long to read one, but I'm happy that I did. In this one, we follow Minerva Highwood, who is quite literally the definition of not like other girls, if I'm being honest. She is the one that is into rocks, and she is into reading, and she's like this intellectual sort of creature, I guess you could say. And then we've got Lord Payne, who is quite literally a playboy. He always has a new conquest, and he doesn't really want to settle down. And the only reason why he would consider it is because he really wants to get his inheritance in order to keep on doing what he does. And Minerva, knowing what this Lord Payne wants, she makes him an offer. In order to unlock his inheritance, he needs to take her to Scotland to a summit in order to expose some great scientific information she has found. And so these unlikely people will now have to fake an elopement, fake to be in love, and to go through every adventure you could possibly think of in the span of a week. This was honestly super exciting. I didn't think I would love this as much as I did, but when I tell you these two go through everything, it's like they literally have to lie and bamboozle to everybody. They literally have to do the craziest of things, say the craziest of narratives, and go through hell and back in order to get and do what they need to do and what they need to get. It is honestly so wild. And then in the midst of all of that, you've got all of this steamy stuff, which I very much enjoyed. I very much enjoyed how curious Minerva was about the topic of Zizeks. It was just quite endearing and just also comedic at times to read about. And also the way that Minerva and Colin complement each other as a couple was just really, really nice, because at the end of the day, Colin never really underestimates Minerva's intelligence in a way that other people tend to do. And he also finds her very attractive, which is also something that not a lot of people can say, even though she's very clearly beautiful. And so even though the not like other girl vibes are present throughout the entirety of the book, I would say it's the best kind of not like other girls, and it really does does work in this time period, I'd say. And so I would say, honestly, and I say this very loosely because I haven't read any historical romances beyond this one, I would say this is a great place to start with the genre if it's something that you're looking to do, because I certainly had zero prior knowledge of this genre or what usually goes down, and this one was a great start to it, and now I want to read more. Here I have another one of my March book club picks for Patreon, and that is The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter by Theodora Goss. That rolled over to the month of April due to my dear old reading slump, which really came in strong right onto me, and there was nothing I could do about it, and so I just had to roll with it pretty much. But this one though, I really enjoyed this a lot as well. I didn't really know what to expect with this one, and I was really scared about it too, because I know a lot of people love this, but I didn't know what I was gonna get really, and that was kind of making me a little bit intimidated to read this, even though the book is like really not that long. But essentially this is a feminist retelling of gothic stories, gothic characters that you are very familiar with, like Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll and Hyde, Rappaccini's Daughter, Sherlock Holmes, Dracula, just all of the things you can possibly think of like the Gothic era was most likely included in this book. Now in this one we follow Mary, who is Dr. Jekyll's daughter, and we follow her after her mother's death and her trying to figure out how to live now that her mother has passed away and she has had to get rid of the entire staff and there is virtually no money to live with. However, she remembers that there was a really big reward promised for the person who managed to solve a case related to her father, and she goes to enlist Sherlock Holmes' help in order to do that. There she ends up meeting Diana and then a lot of other girls who are also related to these Gothic retellings. I personally really loved this. I gave it 4 stars, and I think the reason why I enjoyed this so much was because of Theodora Goss's note at the end. Now there she was talking about how in her doctoral dissertation she was trying to figure out the answer to why mad scientists in the 19th century create or start to create female monsters in order to destroy them ultimately. And while she couldn't get that answered in her dissertation, she wanted to explore that a bit more, but in the format of this book. And personally, I think that message was conveyed incredibly well. And I also like how in the story, the ultimate message of being a monster is kind of left up to the reader. Do you really think they're monsters, or do you just think that they're highly human and just misunderstood? Do you think they're a byproduct of their upbringing, or just considered monsters because of the monsters themselves that created them? There are so many questions that kind of come up as you read this, or at least when I was reading this, I was kind of thinking about that question as well, and I found it incredibly fascinating. And I also, as a person who is not that embroiled into Gothic literature, I managed to catch a lot of references, which personally made me feel very good. And I just really felt rewarded as a reader when I recognized something. I was like, oh my god, that's from Dracula. Oh my god, that's Sherlock Holmes. It was just really entertaining. It also has these passages that are almost like oral history interruptions, which I quite enjoyed. I know a lot of people haven't enjoyed those, but I think honestly it gave the story so much life because it's almost like the characters are directly talking to you as a reader, and it feels very interactive. I definitely do think though this is one of those books that you need to go in with for the vibes and for the characters. If you're here for the plot, you're likely to walk away a bit disappointed because it is very slow of a story, as a lot of Gothic books tend to be. And if you're the sort of person who likes to guess little plot twists and to see where the story's going, it will likely be sort of underwhelming. However, I think if you manage to fall in love with the characters and you really end up enjoying the format of the story, I think it's definitely something you could potentially love. Now, after The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter, I did manage to tackle one of the reading vlogs that I've been wanting to make for a while, and that was reading my favorite booktuber's favorite books. And to kick things off, I read The Astonishing Color of After by Emily X. Arpan, and I absolutely loved this. I gave it 5 stars. I think it was a really beautiful narrative, and if you're looking to get into this book, I would highly also suggest getting the audiobook. It was absolutely phenomenal, and it was one of those things that I just kept going, one more chapter, I can't put this down just yet, because the narration was out of this world, and it just kept you engaged, it just kept you in it, and you didn't really feel time passing by up until I looked at the clock and I was like, ooh, it's 2 a.m, kind of have to go to bed, even though I kind of don't want to. In this one, we follow Lee after her mother's death. Her mother has unfortunately committed suicide, so there is a big trigger warning for that, and depression. It is 2 of the biggest elements of this book. However, she is convinced that once her mother passes away, she turns into a bird. Now, knowing this, she gets the opportunity to travel to Taiwan to meet her mom's parents for the very first time, and it is there that she'll find out more truths than she initially thought possible, both about herself, her family, her father, and just history and stories that she never even thought possible. Now, this book structurally is probably one of my favorites that I've read in a while. Not only do you have alternating POVs between past and present, but you also have a magical realism element that just makes you question kind of everything as you go along the story, and it really puts you kind of in the same headspace as Lee, where you're constantly questioning and thinking about, is the mom actually a bird? Is the mom not a bird? What is reality? What is not reality? What is truth? What is lie? And it just makes you fall down this rabbit hole of hope and love and despair and truth all at the same time. And I really like the way that this was written too, and I love the emphasis that the author put at the end in their author's note when talking about why this book was executed the way that it was, about how, and if you have any history with mental health, you'll be able to know how mental health has its ups and downs, and how suicide and depression and anxiety and basically every mental health category that we talk about manifests itself differently for people, and how you literally cannot judge a person by the way that they're acting or by the way that they're dressing, because it's never really indicative of how they're feeling on the inside. A person could be incredibly well dressed, incredibly well spoken, smiley all of the time, and just appear very outwardly happy. That doesn't necessarily reflect how they're feeling mentally. And I also love the affirmation as well of how something like suicide tends to be a taboo in society when it really shouldn't be, and how a lot of the time talking about it, just having that first step towards acknowledging that it's a thing, acknowledging the fact that the person is even thinking about it, can be the first step towards saving somebody's life, and how these thoughts don't necessarily have a reason to be. Sometimes they just happen, and you can clearly see how she wrote that into the story and never really explaining how these things manifested into Lee's mom's life. And I love that reaffirmation again, because I think it's probably, if not, the most realistic depiction of this particular subject matter I've seen in a while. I was genuinely reading this and I was laughing, I was crying, I was smiling, I was just feeling all of the emotions with this one. And I personally think it was beautifully written. You guys know me, I love lyrical writing, so this was something that was right up my alley. It's very much giving purple prose, and I also like how interwoven art was into the story, and that's why the book title is The Astonishing Color of After, because Lee is a person that associates everything with art and color, emotion, life, people, and I love how that manifested itself time and time again into the story and how it ultimately panned out. I just think everybody should read this book. Obviously, if you find yourself in the possibility of reading about subject matters like these, I personally think it's a very important read, and I obviously go a bit more in depth about everything as I was reading in that reading vlog, so if you'd like to see my thoughts about this as I'm reading and like checking in with the camera, you can go check out that vlog, which will surely be linked down below. Next one I read on that same video was On Earth We're Really Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong, and this is one of those books that absolutely made me sob my eyes out. Gave it 5 stars, undoubtedly so. I just don't know what else to say about this book. One person in the comment section said it took me a while to kind of get out of that high of reading this book, and I personally agree. I feel like I'm not out of the tunnel yet, because anytime I think about this book, like I get choked up and I want to cry. And essentially the premise of this book is us following Little Dog as he writes a letter to a mom who cannot read. It follows him in his most important moments and years of his life as he unearths family trauma, as he says things to his mom that he really hasn't been able to say before. It also serves as an exploration of Little Dog's mom and him trying to figure out exactly why she did the things that she did and why she did them in the way that she did them, and how that has ultimately impacted him in his life. And I think it was really interesting how this book, at least to me, honestly unearthed feelings that I had bottled up from like childhood, and I was reading and I was just crying from like page 10, because it just reminded me of things that I had lived through with my parents as I was really young, and it almost feels very cathartic as a reader to kind of experience what Little Dog did and really just relinquishing pain in ways and being able to let go of things that you know don't serve you anymore, which is exactly how Little Dog feels by the end of the story. But this book was beautiful. The audiobook was narrated by Ocean Vuong himself, which I think definitely adds to the experience of this all. And you guys know how much I love authors narrating their own stories, so that made it extra special. This was really lyrical. It was really poetic. You can tell that Ocean Vuong is a poet just by reading this book alone, and the way that it handles mental health and coming to oneself and figuring out your identity. It's honestly a coming of age story, and dealing with PTSD from your parents, from people who experienced, for particularly in this, the Vietnam War, it was just so fascinating and soul-wrecking to read, and I would definitely suggest this book to everybody. Literally get yourself the audiobook, let it take you elsewhere. I also read Frostheart by Jamie Littler for that video, and let me tell you, this is one of the cutest middle grades I have ever read. In this one, we follow Ash, who lives in the coldest part of a monster-infested snow sea. And Ash has been waiting for his missing parents to show up one day, except that they still haven't. And now that the people from his village have found out exactly what power Ash possesses and how dangerous it can come to be, or how scared really they are of it, they exile him. And because of that, he gets the opportunity to hop on the Frostheart, which is a voyage ship, and figure out exactly what the lullaby his parents left behind means, and how that could potentially lead him back to them. The found family aspect in Frostheart was one of my favorite things in this. Honestly, the mix between animal companions and just humans in this, absolutely phenomenal. I still don't know what to call Tobu, because he's a Yeti, but is a Yeti an animal companion or just a companion? You guys let me know in the comments what you think, but I loved every single dynamic in this. I love how Ash is more than willing to embark on this voyage, not only to find his parents potentially, but to also just find out who he is as a person. He has a lot of the time been rained down by what other people think, and that has really put him down and discouraged him from making friends or even from being himself. And so now it is his time to figure out who he is, how his powers work, and to make real friends for the very first time who will see him as exactly who he is and not necessarily for what his powers could potentially mean. It is exciting, it is action-packed, it is perfectly paced, and the ending literally had me shocked and bamboozled. Like, I'm not even kidding you guys. I love middle grades that treat me like this. I love middle grades that make me gasp towards the ending and that genuinely shock me, and this did all of that. Like, it was genuinely such a great book. The audiobook was also a great time. Can you tell how much I relied on audiobooks this given month? The audiobook was 10 out of 10. Immediately got books 2 and 3 in audio format because I need to experience them that way as well. And so I can't wait to read book 2 and see what happens there, because this was just so wholesome. I think that's the best way I'd explain it. Just wholesome all around. As the world would know it, in the month of April, it kind of turned into the month of Heartstopper for everybody. Everybody was rereading Heartstopper. Heartstopper the show came out, and I of course had to join the train and reread the entirety of Heartstopper. Now, I read Heartstopper for the first time last year, and I just had to reread it to refresh for the show. I do have a vlog coming up that contains Heartstopper and me reading it. It is a day in the life vlog, so expect that very, very soon. I am currently prepping content for you guys so that it can go up while I'm on break, while I move, and so that will go up next week, so you can definitely look forward to that. However, if you don't know what Heartstopper is about, we follow Nick and Charlie, who meet one day in class, and Nick offers, or rather encourages Charlie to try out for the rugby team. It is there that they make friends of each other and really get to know each other better through the sport, and slowly but surely they start developing this really beautiful friendship that slowly turns into something a bit romantic, and eventually will lead both of them to really just question life, relationships, embrace who they are fully, embrace their sexualities, embrace their identities, and just tackle life head on. I absolutely love how wholesome this is, and this is also really heavy, so I might just have to split this in two like this, but I love how wholesome this is. I love how just heartwarming Heartstopper is. Like, honestly, all of the side characters also have loads to give. Darcy, Tara, Elle, Tao, all of them just have beautiful friendships with both the main characters and with other side characters as well. It is genuinely a story about coming of age. It is a story about love. It is a story about being a teenager and going through the trials and tribulations of high school, which for a lot of people is not as easy as meets the eye. The later installments, 3 and 4, definitely do deal a lot more with mental health, themes of depression, anxiety, OCD, eating disorders, and I think she also does that in such a realistic way. Particularly volume 4 is one of those volumes that still to this day I read. This is the second time I've read it. I read it last year and then I read it this year, and both times I was just filled with this sense of being seen with eating disorders and with anxiety and just the anxiousness that food can sometimes bring into your life. And I had never really read anything like that where I read it, and it just felt like the warmest hug ever. And it's that reassurance that things do get okay with time, with the right support system, and with putting in the right amounts of effort. But I also like the reaffirmation of you can't really fix people. People need to want to work on their own things, work through their struggles, work through their issues. And the best you can do is just be there for them and not really pressure them into doing anything, because a lot of the time that can also make people not want to do something. And I really like how Alice Oseman talks about that, because it's a common thread throughout the series where people just want to help each other because they're really great friends and they're just really amazing people. But sometimes it takes a little bit more and a little bit less of that. And so it just kind of boils down to you need to show up for people in the way that they need you to show up, and rather not in the ways that you want to show up sometimes, which sometimes it's a hard differentiation, but I honestly just love how she writes it in all of her volumes. And all of these were 5 stars because I love it so much. And last but not least, in the month of April, I read The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. I finally finished it! I finished this book! If you guys know, if you've been here for a while, then you know that I started this book last year, I didn't finish it, and I finally did it, you guys. I finally finished this, and I loved every second of this. This was a 5-star. The audiobook for this was absolutely out of this world. One of the best audiobooks I've ever listened to. And I also love the premise of the story. The way that this story came to be is because Grady Hendrix observed his mom as a person who was in a book club, as a person who read, and that really wasn't appreciated in his household at the time that he was growing up. He didn't appreciate it enough, and he really wanted to explore the idea of his mom going against somebody like Dracula and it really not being a fair fight. And I think he did it perfectly. I absolutely love the way that this book went down. We follow Patricia Campbell, who deals with a very ordinary but not life. Her husband is a workaholic. Her kids really just want nothing to do with her. Like, they very much have a life of their own. And she is a part of a book club that reads mysteries, true crime, non-fictions about crimes, and just everything and everything in between. And one day Patricia is attacked by an elderly neighbor, and she is saved by one James Harris, except that James Harris is not all that he appears to be, and that might just bring trouble to that very quiet neighborhood they've all been living in. The way that Grady Hendrix tackles the social commentary of the 90s was something that just had me in awe for the entirety of the novel, and I was just in awe of how he didn't shy away from a lot of the conversations about life in the 90s, the patriarchy, misogyny, being a woman in the 90s with all of the expectations of being a housewife, of having proper etiquette, of doing and saying the right things in order for the husbands to not look bad, which obviously ties in with the patriarchy and the misogyny. Themes about race and racism, and how white people did not really want to live in certain neighborhoods because Black people were around, and then building gated communities in order to choose literally who gets to see their kids or not, or who their kids are around. I absolutely love how he just, again, didn't shy away from any of that. And then surrounding all of that commentary, he's got a story revolving a vampire and including elements of classic gothic literature and classic vampire lore, but still making it his own, and then including the book club element and all of these ladies as well, who are all struggling with their own individual things. I like the investigation aspect of this. I love the bamboozling aspect of this, and James Harris as a character was absolutely despicable to read about. I was genuinely in this and I was like, I can't believe nobody's noticing how this man is gaslighting and gatekeeping everything and everyone. It was just absolutely wild, and listening to the audiobook of this, I was like, this is crazy. Like, I was listening, I was just staring at a wall and I was like, there's no way this is happening. I obviously was following along with the physical. I annotated the hell out of this book because this, the best way I can put it, it's just good soup. That's all there is to it. And those are all of the books that I read in April, you guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up down below. Comment down below. Again, have you read any of these? What were your thoughts on them? What did you read in April? Some books that you loved, some books that you disliked. Share it all down in the comments so that we can all peruse some other books and just talk all things literature. If you reached the end of the video, let's leave a vampire emoji down in the comments in honor of my favorite book of the month, which was obviously Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. Don't forget to subscribe down below if you haven't done so already. I am constantly uploading uploading videos I am sure you do not want to miss. And if you want more exclusive content, videos, live streams, all the good stuff, I also have a moving series over on my Patreon because I'm obviously moving next Monday and I'm sharing all of that in an episodic format in Patreon. You guys will get kind of like the compound version, like the very shortened down, watered down version of that. But if you want to see it all, kind of snoop all of that, you can join to Patreon. It will be available over there. And you'll be able to find that down below alongside all of my social medias. Once more, thank you so much to Inky Art Press for sponsoring today's video in honor of If You Change Your Mind by Robbie Weber. Don't forget also that this book is already out. You can get your hands on it. I will be leaving a link at the top of the description so you guys can go check it out, grab your own copy, and enjoy everything this has to offer. I love you guys so much, and I shall see you on the next one. Bye, guys.